Would you rather have one marshmallow or two? In the 1970s, a study on delayed gratification called the Stanford Marshmallow Experiment was conducted, where a kid was given one marshmallow, and they were told that they could eat the marshmallow immediately, but if they waited, they would get 2 marshmallows. The aim of this experiment was to see if the kids who waited had better outcomes in life than those who didn't wait. Originally, the conclusion was that those who waited had great self-control and would therefore make better decisions and have a more successful life. However, later versions of this experiment led to a different discovery. Many kids in the study ate the first marshmallow, not because they were impatient, but because they didn't believe this stranger conducting the experiment was going to follow through on their promise to give them another marshmallow later. For many kids, their decision not to wait wasn't based on a lack of self-control, but rather on a lack of trust.
Has anyone ever made a promise to you that you then had to wait for? Maybe they promised to give you something or do something special for you. And at first the waiting can be fun, right? While you're waiting, the anticipation and excitement starts to build because you know that on the other side of waiting is the thing or experience you're looking forward to. But what happens when the fulfillment of that promise gets delayed? And delayed again and again? Pretty soon you begin to wonder if it's ever going to happen, if it's even worth waiting for, and maybe you should just give up hope. I'm pretty sure that this is something many of us can identify with. And for some of us, it's something we've been waiting on God for. In our lives and in our faith, there are many things that we wish would happen instantly. Some promises we want fulfilled right away. But instead God says, wait for it. See, waiting on a promise places us somewhere between now and not yet. And that can be exciting, but a frustrating place to be in. When we're waiting on God to fulfill a promise, it's easy for us to begin to wonder if God can be trusted, especially when the waiting seems to be taking forever. We begin to question whether God actually cares, and if God does love me, then why do I have to wait so long? If you're feeling like that today, if you're waiting on God for something, then I hope that the stories we're going to look into in this series will encourage you to trust God even when the wait gets long.
Tonight we'll be looking at the story of Abram and Sarai. God changes their names later in their story, so we know them as Abraham and Sarah. And if anyone knows what it's like to wait for a promise, it's these two. So what promise were they waiting for? Let's see in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1 to 3. The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I'll bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you." Now this was a huge promise from God, but it was also a request for deep trust. God is asking Abraham to leave his home, to leave the land that he knows, and trust that God will show him where to go. And then he goes on to say that he will make Abraham into a great nation, and that the world will be blessed through him. Now you've probably heard the song, "Father Abraham had many sons had Father Abraham." But when God made this promise, Abraham didn't have any children. He didn't have any descendants. So how was God going to make Abraham into a great nation if he didn't have any descendants? Him and his wife hadn't been able to have kids. And at this point in their story, they were already pretty old. But Abraham and Sarah obeyed God. They packed up their stuff and hit the road. They trusted God to show them where to go. But let's see how Abraham was feeling about waiting for children. In Genesis chapter 15, verses 3 to 6. And Abraham said, "You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." Then the word of the Lord came to him, "This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir." He took him outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if you indeed can count them." Then he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. It's like God was saying to Abraham, "I'm going to give you a whole packet of marshmallows. You just have to wait for it." And that's a great promise. But God didn't give Abraham a plan or a timeline. He just gave him a promise. Now it's one thing to wait a few hours, days, weeks, maybe months for something that you're excited about. But having to wait for years, that's a whole different story. That's when we begin to feel discouraged and impatient. And discouragement can lead to doubt, and doubt can lead us to make some pretty bad decisions, like taking matters into our own hands. That's what Sarah did. She got tired of waiting, and maybe she thought that God wasn't going to follow through on this promise, especially at her age. So she took matters into her own hands and made a plan of her own to give Abraham the promised son. In Genesis chapter 16, verse 1 to 6, it says, "Now Sarai, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, 'The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her.' Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. When she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. Then Sarai said to Abram, 'You are responsible for the wrong I am suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me. Your slave is in your hands.' Abram said, 'Do with her whatever you think best.' Then Sarai mistreated Hagar, so she fled from her." Sarah's lack of trust led to her making an unwise decision. She probably thought that she was too old to have a child and that she needs to help God to fulfill that promise. But her plan, although it did result in a baby, also resulted in jealousy. So this plan backfired. It was a mess. But the beautiful thing is that God didn't get angry and punish them. He showed them grace, and He still fulfilled His promise. 25 years of waiting. Sarah, in her old age, gave birth to a son. God could have punished Abram and Sarah for their lack of trust, but He didn't. It's like they ate their first marshmallow, and God gave them 2 more anyway. Now, I don't know what promises you're waiting on God to fulfill, and I don't know how long you will wait, but here's one thing I do know. God can be trusted. Proverbs chapter 3 verse 5 to 7 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your path straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil." Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. See, we need to be reminded that God has a plan, but we might just have to wait for it. The waiting and what happens in the waiting might not always make sense. But what we need to understand is that when God makes a promise, the plan He has in mind is way better than anything you and I could ever think of. So in your waiting, remember these lessons that we learned from Abraham and Sarah. God can be trusted. We don't have to have it all figured out. God knows the future better than we do, and His plans are better than anything we can think of. And even when we get tired of waiting, God never gets tired of showing us grace and compassion. So whatever you're trusting God for, remember, He knows what's best, even if you have to wait for it.